This is History Myths and Misconceptions. And today's myth is Roman gods are the same as Greek gods. This is a very popular myth which is sometimes forced upon the audience by literature and by teachers at schools. Quite often, if you go to the bookstore looking for some work on Roman mythology or Roman religion, you will find either nothing or a book on Greek mythology that has a small section in the end which briefly explains a couple of things about how things worked in Rome, usually in a pretty simplified form. Obviously, there are works on Roman mythology, but they are almost never intended for the mass market and sometimes are not very well written. Basically, we've been taught since early childhood that Roman mythology is just an offshoot of Greek mythology. More of the same, but with different names, don't bother. There's a kernel of truth in that. Roman culture, and Latin culture in general, was unbelievably Hellenized. And it was Hellenized from very, very ancient times, even before the city of Rome was founded. But that doesn't mean that their culture was identical. And obviously, religion wasn't identical either. As we all know, Roman gods have Greek counterparts. That's true. But if a god has a Greek counterpart, it doesn't automatically mean it is exactly the same god, but just with a different name. In fact, the majority of smaller gods never had any Greek counterparts at all. Even some major gods never had a counterpart, like Janus or Quirinus. The gods that actually had a Greek version, well, some of them usually originated as local gods, Roman, Sabine, Etruscan, and then they were Hellenized. Local deity absorbed the backstory and features of a comparable Greek deity and produced some kind of a syncretic greco-roman hybrid. Then they kept evolving in this form and gaining additional features. Even though the end result was relatively close to the Greek version, there were significant differences as well. Another important aspect here is that we are talking about Hellenistic polytheism, which always tried to integrate cults and embraced regional diversity in the worship of the same deity. So when we are saying something like, okay, we have two analogous deities, for example, Aphrodite and Venus, we're not discussing two deities. We're discussing dozens and hundreds of variations from different regions. We're talking about different aspects of the deities. On top of that, Greeks and Romans frequently assumed that foreign gods are in fact the same, just local versions of their own gods, but with different names, because gods are pretty much the same everywhere. Herodotus famously describes Egyptian gods precisely in this manner. And for example, Julius Caesar mentions that the chief god of Gauls is Mercury. He kind of identified the functions of the local deity and came to this conclusion. Quite logical for a Roman. It was a very different situation from what we can see in the environment dominated by Abrahamic religions, where the worship is highly standardized, deviations can be labeled as heresy at any given moment, and, say, the majority of Christians don't perceive the one God of Islam as the same deity as their father God. And obviously Christians will never visit a mosque to pray to Jesus there. So yeah, we're talking about a very different system, and we always must keep that in mind. Greeks and Romans obviously also tried to standardize their religions a little bit. Especially Romans, who were all about regulations and creating a committee within a subcommittee of a bureau for the purpose of advancing the political careers of the individuals. They literally had a college of pontiffs, where a number of high priests of various cults were dealing with their religious affairs. But it wasn't a full-time job. None of these people were professional priests, and all of them were politicians who tried to gain influence and authority. The information that we have about the College of Pontiffs is very important and completely destroys some of the popular myths about the Roman religion. For example, quite often you can hear something like Romans worshipped the same 12 Olympian gods as Greeks. Well, yeah, in a way, it is true, but not entirely. First of all, as we said before, the counterparts were sometimes quite different. And all of this leads to a misconception that 12 main Greek deities, in one form or another, were in fact also the 12 main deities of Rome, which is quite far from reality. You can just check which gods were represented by the Flemings in the college, and try to find the corresponding Greek god for Volturnus, or for Phalacer, or for Carmenta. Even the well-known Greek gods may look slightly odd for the unprepared people reading about Rome. We're going to war, so let's build a temple of Venus. No, seriously, Romans are going to war, so they build a temple of Venus. It doesn't make much sense if you think that Aphrodite is identical to Venus. It makes a lot of sense if you're a Roman. This is an actual episode from the Second Punic War. The main idea behind the temple was that, okay, we should transport the image of the Carthaginian goddess Astarte from Sicily. Astarte was identified with Venus, so in Rome she becomes an aspect of Venus. And this version, Venus Erycina, the Carthaginian Venus, so to speak, kind of changes the allegiance and starts helping Romans. And Venus herself is a progenitor, one of the progenitors, of Rome, the mother goddess of all Romans. Makes perfect sense from the religious and even political point of view. And then the teachers at schools all over the world go like, listen children, Aphrodite and Venus are the same goddess. Yeah, and Allah and the Christian Trinity are the same God as well. Technically, they are. But saying they are the same is a bit of a stretch.